get a front row seat with Jesus and his disciples today. Kind of the little private conversation where the boys start off by saying, Lord, we just need you to increase our faith. Increase our faith. Fair request. You ever made that request of the Lord before? I know I have. We oftentimes ask, God, increase our faith. Because what you're asking me to do is difficult, and you know what? I just don't know if I can do it. Well, it's a problem that we have. And it has to do, or I should say, it's the last virtue. It's the same kind of thing. It's temperance. It's difficult. It's a challenge. Because temperance isn't easy. But it's not impossible. It's something that we can do. We can work on it. We can build it. We can perfect it in a natural kind of way. And yet, at the same time, it's a virtue where we need God, and we need God's help. So 6 weeks into this little series on the virtues, you certainly know by now, I hope, that everything that God gives us is, you got it, I think. I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, good. And every one of us is equally as good, yes. And that goodness is from God. And God gives us that goodness and all that is good for one purpose, so that we can be happy. So that we can be happy, especially with Him in eternity. The virtue of temperance hits us, well, where we live, if we consider that we live within our bodies, because this virtue has to do with our senses, our ability to see and hear and smell, taste and touch. And we all have a God-given desire to know the goodness, the delight that we receive through our senses. The desire is directed towards the truth about all those things that feel good, that taste good, the truth that ultimately, well, is Jesus himself. For as he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now in animals, this happens by matter of instinct. Animals do what they do because of instinct. Have you ever been bitten by a dog? I have, on more than one occasion. Not a fun experience. And when it happens, you might say, bad dog. But when you think about it, the dog is really only acting on instinct. Protect my master. Protect my territory. And ultimately, that arm looks like good food. And that's what I want. Instinct. We human beings, we have similar kinds of instincts. Our tummies growl when they're hungry and need to be fed, right? Yeah. But temperance allows us to connect our instinct to our will, to our intellect, to our emotions even, and refrain, unlike the dog, from randomly trying to eat our neighbors. Hopefully none of you have tried to do that. But sadly, temperance gets a bit of a bad rap because of the apparent prohibitions that it suggests, all the good things that we should avoid, well, because they're good. And we wonder, well, why not? If it feels good, do it. If it feels good, why not do it? The temperate person is usually considered to be the party pooper. And every party has one. That's why you invite me, right? If one of those jelly donuts sitting over there by the coffee pot looks good, then two of them must be extra good, and the whole box must be really good. I know I'm good. What the heck? I'm really good. I'll eat the whole box. If it's good, if it feels good, do it. That's not the best approach. The real approach, the best approach really is also not to go to the other extreme that says, if it's good, don't do it. Rather, the best way to approach it is to say, if it feels good, think before you do it. Think before you choose whether or not to do it. St. Thomas Aquinas, he's the guy from which we get all this talk about the virtues and really a good understanding of them. He wrote this. He said, "Temperance does not seek to destroy pleasure." Let me say that again because you need to hear it twice. Temperance does not seek to destroy pleasure. Rather, temperance enables us to remove the desire from the pleasures that would destroy us. In other words, it enables us to control our passions rather than to be enslaved by them. We need to tame our desires. Just like, we tame and train the dog. And we do that so that we can be happy and also so that we can have our arms and legs. Oh, come on, that was funny. You train the dog not to eat somebody's arms and legs, right? And then we'll be happy. Temperance enables us to make the best possible use of those things that we desire, because temperance produces self-control. It produces integrity. And integrity is just simply where we find ourselves with our act together. Temperance enables us to get our act together. Get your act together. Of course, getting our act together, being temperate, ultimately, it's going to make us happy. Let me give you a few examples. Imagine yourself, if you will, living in a glass house. Now, mind you, this particular glass house is impervious to any stone throwing. Okay, so if anybody throws stones at you, you don't have to worry about it. Glass isn't going to break. But while we live in this glass house, there are no curtains. Everything, yes, even that, is on display for the whole world to see. Not the kind of house you want to live in? No, not to worry. I wouldn't want to live in that house either. Of course, we would be able to use temperance, because temperance is the curtains that we need to live in such a house. It makes that kind of house livable because it provides a healthy sense of shame, also known as modesty. Temperance, it inspires a bit of horror at living in a glass house with no curtains. Let me give you another example, and this one really is for the adults among us here. Imagine going to a party, maybe any kind of party, maybe a tailgate party for the local Penn State game, or Notre Dame if you're a fan. It could be a wedding reception. It could be just a backyard gathering of your friends. And, of course, this is unless you suffer from the effects of addictions. There's no adult beverages at the party. Now, what kind of party is that? Seems kind of puritanical to me. Not the kind of party I'd want to go to. You see, temperance helps us to see that everything that God gives us is, it's good. And can be used within reason for our pleasure. In fact, St. Thomas Aquinas says of wine, he advises that we should drink to the point of hilarity, but no more. In other words, drink enough that you're giggling, but not enough that you're falling down drunk. And I guess you could probably say the same thing of barley and hops, too. Oh, come on, that's funny. Wine drunk, this is what Sirach says, wine drunk in the season and temperately is rejoicing of the heart and gladness of the soul. Wine drunk to excess is bitterness to the soul and with provocation and stumbling. Yeah, it's true for anything that we consume for our nourishment. I think the greatest example, though, because it's the greatest good that God has given to us, is the ability to procreate and all the pleasures that go along with that act. And it's also the one area that gets us in so much trouble, because it's really the one area that Satan loves to get into and use to destroy us and to destroy our lives, putting us on the losing side of the culture wars. Maybe you might remember last week I talked about religion and how religion binds us to God. Well, when two people engage in that act of procreation, or even when anyone attempts to simulate that act, a kind of bond is formed. It's a spiritual bond, a soul bond. And unless that bond is tempered by marriage, the sacrament of marriage, Satan can and will and does get into that relationship, get into that person, and create all kinds of havoc. Which brings me, of course, to that part of temperance that really does require the help of God, because it's all about singularities. And for those of you that are science fiction fans, I know that sounds, kind of out there, but really not so much. It's about a big picture. Singularities are about what really is important. Because we tend to forget and really rarely consider what is most important, because we do dwell on singularities, those things that are real and particular, that we can actually see and hear and smell, which prompt the desire for tasting and touching, which is why such things as pornography are such a problem and so evil, because it creates the most powerful challenge to the virtue of temperance. What's the challenge? Lust. That vice that allows us to use others for our own personal satisfaction. It prevents us from seeing the other person as, well, a person created by God. It prevents us from wanting and working for what is best for that other person. And what do? Well, you turn your attention away from the beauty that catches your eye and focus rather on what that other person is rightfully due: honor and respect. It's true even within the confines of the sacrament of marriage. In fact, Pope John Paul II got himself in a bit of grief when he said that even in the sacrament of marriage, one spouse can be guilty of the sin of lust over the other spouse. So St. Thomas tells us the best way to practice temperance is to focus on the very highest of universals, the things of God. What are the things of God? Everything that's good, everything that God gives us. And when we forget about God, when our attention lacks a focus on God and what He gives, those spiritual things, well, our lives will lack any sense of joy. And when there's no joy in the things of God, then we're reduced to seeking mere bodily pleasures. So to put a curb on lust, focus on the things of God, from which flows His love. Now you might be saying to yourself at this point, I don't know, Father. I don't know if I can do that. Well, go back to the gospel. Jesus gives a kind of nebulous response about a tree being uprooted after the disciples ask Him to increase their faith. He goes on to give an even more perplexing response, a perplexing example, one of a servant whose master just doesn't seem to let up on him when he comes in from after a hard day's worth of work. It's like, Jesus, what's up with that? Well, it's really kind of simple. Jesus tells us, gives us this clincher. He says about when the work is done, He says, we're unprofitable servants. We've done what we're obliged to do. The obligation is self-control. The obligation is temperance, which says, you know what? I don't need to eat that entire box of jelly donuts. One is enough. What God has given me is enough. What I have is enough. Because everything I have is from God, and everything that God gives me is good. And if I use His goods the way He intends them to be used, then I'm going to really have more than I need. In fact, I am enough. So I can do everything he asks of me. Yeah. Every one of us, every one of you is good because that's how God made you. Admit to the obligation to self-control. Admit to temperance and the need for temperance. And you can be assured that in the battles of the culture war, you'll find another victory.